It has been a few years since I have actually had any part of my anatomy crushed by a woman, so this experience last week was a real treat. Now that I am married, I find that it is a little harder to get my fingers trampled, while not only trying not to be noticed by the woman stepping on them, but also by my wife. I mean, I'm sure she would get pissed at me being turned on by having parts of myself trampled by some other strange woman. Anyway, I was on vacation last week, and she had to work, so I was all on my own for a whole week. I always liked antiques and especially enjoyed looking for antique audio equipment and alt records. I went to this large antique barn where they have the place broken up into several little office-like areas that house each dealer's wares. This day, there were a lot of women there. Most ranged in age from 30-something to the mid-40s, with a few younger and a few older thrown in for good measure. I was walking around looking as much at the ladies as the antiques when I came upon a rather large shelf full of alt records. It seems that the records are always on the lower shelves, and this display was such that there was a long row of them on the lowest shelf. I started thumbing through the alps when a movement caught my eye. I looked to my side to see a very shapely pair of legs and a really fine ass at about my face level. I looked up to see that this was a woman of about 40, with light brown shoulder-length hair. She may have been 40, but had a body of an 18-year-old. I looked down only to find a gorgeous pair of feet in a very sexy pair of black high-heeled sandals. The heels were those new kinds, which looked to be about 2 wide from the back and about 1/4 wide from the side. I was looking at those feet as much as the records. As I watched, she stepped to the side, and her heel landed squarely on a pencil. You could see the pencil bend under her weight, and could also hear it crack and crunch as she shifted all her weight to that heel. She stood on it for a couple of minutes without even noticing or caring. Then she stepped closer to me. I kept thumbing through the records and shifted a little closer to her. As I did, I placed my one hand on the ground, as if to support myself. She stepped a little closer again. This time we were close enough to each other that I could slide my hand and touch her heel. I had my fingers actually touching her heel. I could not resist just touching her shoe and feeling that heel as she stood there. Then stood up on her toes to get something from an upper shelf. I figured it was now or never, so I slid my fingers under her heel. In a couple of seconds, I was rewarded with her full weight on my fingers. That heel mashed my index and middle fingers into the floor mercilessly. She stood there looking at some glass object for a couple of minutes. As she did, she would shift her weight off and on my fingers. When her weight was on the food that was on my fingers, her heel dug in with such pressure that it brought tears to my eyes. After about 2 minutes, she stood back up on her toes and put the item back up on the shelf. Then she came back down on my fingers hard, twisted on her heel, which ground my fingers into the floor and hurt like hell, and looked at me. I guess she realized she had just stepped on my fingers. She gave a casual glance and matter-of-factly said, "I guess that must have hurt," in a sort of moo poor you sort of voice, and just strutted off. It was all too obvious that she could have cared less if she had broken my fingers. Well, my fingers had some nice scrapes and bruises on them.